He switched them. He switched them. See, I have his gun now.
Of course you do. You took it when you arrested me.
What?
Take him to the Hall of Destruction for summary judgment and combustion.
Wait. I can explain this. I'm sorry. I'm not feeling. He is the one who's feeling.
Hey there, Enthusiacs. Welcome back to Hero Talk. I am your host, Judge Greg. Joining me today, I am bringing Nick back. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How you doing?
I'm doing not bad. Not bad, actually. Our film today is going to be Equilibrium, the 2002 dystopian thriller action movie, I suppose. I don't know, starring Chris Bale. As always, on Hero Talk, this is a spoiler podcast. Alright, we try to keep it to the movie at hand, but we don't want to edit ourselves, so basically the rule of thumb is anything that has been released is considered fair game. So you've been warned. Alright, Nick, what'd you think of Equilibrium?
I think this movie is a good bit of fun. It's something that has little things that you can think about, but still at the same time, it's got a lot of style over its substance.
Yeah, I can see that. This is one of these movies, and I really need to stop doing this. I have got to stop doing Hero Talks on movies that I haven't seen in a long time, but I remember being good. Because every time I do that, when I go back to watch the movie with a critical eye, I find it's not nearly as good as I remember it being. And that's the same deal with Equilibrium. I very much liked this movie when I saw it, and I saw it in a very small distribution theater in 2002. So I actually saw it the year of its release, and I quite liked it. In fact, I walked out of this movie saying, and this is honest to goodness the truth, I walked out of it saying, you know what, I bet Chris Bale would make a good Batman.
Oh, that's a bit prophetic there, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's what I thought. I walked out of it going like, oh man, it would be really nice. So, man, can you imagine how excited I was a couple years later when they actually got cast? I was like, oh man, he's gonna be Batman. I was so excited.
I'm gonna bet that's about the inverse to the confusion everyone had with Heath Ledger when he was announced as cast as the Joker.
Yeah, and then I think Ben Affleck is probably somewhere in between there.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, but as I've said before, people who are all up on Ben Affleck need to remember that nobody liked Michael Keaton either, and I think he did just fine. So, but anyway, so I like the movie. I'm going to point out right now, I'm going to start right off the top of the show with it. That gun swap twist doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, everybody always asks, like, alright, so how does the gun swap thing work? And they always ask, like, there's some way that they haven't thought of that makes it work. Even though when you actually think about the movie, it doesn't work. And, you know, and to be honest, like, when I first saw the movie, I didn't even think about it all that much. I'm like, oh, that's awesome, he swapped the guns. And it wasn't until, like, I'm still talking about the movie a couple hours later, which is a credit to the movie, that I'm still talking about it hours after leaving. And I sit there, and it just dawns on me, like, wait, that gun switch doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work for a lot of reasons. For one thing, it's never been established why they can actually track where guns were or where they were fired. He fired 2 guns when he only swapped 1, and even more so in the editing, it wound up getting put in the wrong place. So it got swapped before or after it was used. I can't even remember which one it was offhand, but right, it was after. It got swapped after it was supposed to have been used, so it didn't make any sense.
Right. So, yeah, it just, I mean, it was really weird. And we've had some side conversations about this movie, and I think I can fix most of the plot holes with just one simple phrase. John Preston is an idiot.
Yep.
He's not smart. He thought that whole scene works if John Preston thinks, hey, I did that swap. Yeah, I fooled you. I've delivered the bad cleric. And it's almost like at that point DuPont and Bran are looking at each other like, all right, let's just roll with it. Let's just roll with this. And it works better that way if you just think he's just so insanely dumb that they're like, all right, calling an audible. We're gonna make him think this worked, even though it doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense, but if you can roll with it, that's really the best way to take it, is just that there's a lot of stupid going around in this movie, and in particular in Preston.
Yeah. And not to say that this isn't a fun movie, because it's fun. It's just, it thinks it's smarter than it really is. So don't find yourself racking your brain going like, oh, what does the director know that I don't? Because he doesn't. And in fact, I watched the director's commentary of this movie specifically to see if he was going to address the switch. And no, he doesn't. He doesn't even talk about it in the commentary. He's just like, oh, whatever. Swap the guns. That's pretty cool. Like, oh, you don't even get why that doesn't work.
This is a movie that probably thinks it's smarter than it is and has enough neat little things in there that you can actually think about, your brain can chew on for a while, that'll almost trick you into thinking that it's smarter than it is. But like you said, the best way to explain the things that are happening in the movie is massive amounts of stupidity, and that can't be a smart movie.
Yeah. Now, the director and writer, who's Kurt Wimmer, he's done some other stuff that I actually don't mind, and some stuff that I thought was absolutely terrible. He was a writer on the Thomas Crown Affair. That was the remake with Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo. He worked on the remake for Total Recall, which I actually didn't see, but some people seem to like. He was a writer on Salt with Angelina Jolie, which I actually quite liked. And he was a writer for Law Abiding Citizen. That was with Jamie Foxx and Gerard Butler, which that one actually wasn't terrible in terms of, because that one would try to be a smart movie too, and that didn't screw it up nearly as bad. He was also a writer in Ultraviolet, which Ultraviolet really felt like he was just trying to, it felt like he was trying to do Equilibrium again, but this time with Mila Jovovich. And it just didn't quite work, because Mila Jovovich, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, wasn't as charming as Christian Bale.
I haven't seen that movie. I've heard it described as kind of another more refined version of Equilibrium here. I wouldn't know, but I entirely would believe that she was not as charming as Christian Bale.
Yeah. I mean, there's fun things. Well, I will say one thing that he does quite well is he does, like, the crazy fake action set pieces quite well. And Ultraviolet was full of them. Equilibrium's full of them, and I like it. And, you know, as I said, the movie is not a bad movie. It's actually quite fun. And the action scenes, even when they don't make the slightest bit of sense and when they're contrived, are still extremely fun to watch.
Yeah, there's a sense of, you might call it hyper-realism with them. It's not like a whole bunch of shaky cam so you can't see what's going on. You can see what's going on. Is the things that are happening don't exactly make sense in a realistic context, but you can look at it and say it's within the realm of what's theoretically possible that a person might be able to do some of these things. They seem to make sense in a physical space. Not like a lot of the stuff you might see in The Matrix or those movies. There's just a bunch of stuff in that that's so far out there it's just completely impossible. But most of these you can imagine something like that actually working.
Yeah. Speaking of The Matrix, you made me think of this, is when I first saw the original trailers for this film, and I actually saw trailers for this film before I actually watched it, so I am probably one of those rare people who actually sort of have a normal theatrical experience around this movie, because I think 90% of the people who I've talked to who've seen this movie either saw it in a DVD release because they thought it looked cool, or they saw it when it was on Netflix. But I remember seeing the trailer, and the trailer really tried to sell this movie like it was the next Matrix. To the point where I almost thought it was going to be people doing these supernatural things, and instead what you got was a lot of grounded in reality style fighting. Which was a pleasant surprise, because I can't say I was really looking forward to another Matrix movie, to be honest with you.
Yeah, the Matrix movies are smarter, are not as smart as they think they are in a completely different way.
In a way that's not as fun.
Yes, their version of smarter than they think they are, or not as smart as they think they are, I keep saying that backwards,
yeah. Maybe you're not as
is
smart as you
just
think
obnoxious. This one is almost kind of charming, and that's kind of cute, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind, any times, like I said, even when this movie completely backtracked on itself and just, screwed it up, you're still like, it's still fun.
Yeah, and it's not like this is a rock stupid movie either. This is either a blatant ripoff or a glorious homage to all kinds of different, dystopian sci-fi future things.
Yeah, at one point
at least being 1984.
Yeah, I was about to say, at one point I tried to watch this movie and see if I could catch all the references to other dystopian future movies.
You will not.
First of all, it was a fool's errand in the first place. I gave up very quickly, but I found that if you were unsure, it probably was done in 1984.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the cast, because, I mean, this is a phenomenal cast considering, how small of a movie this thing was.
And how few significant roles there were.
Exactly. Now, the budget of this film was only $20 million, which is, it was more than I thought it was going to be, because it was very much an independent-style film. I don't think anyone picked it up for major distribution.
At least in the United States, but that's kind of a different story there.
Yeah, that's true. I hear that this movie was much, much bigger overseas than it actually was in the United States.
Yeah, the United States release got really limited because they didn't didn't want to, they already had a profit overseas and they didn't want to invest in a widescreen United States release and wind up losing money. So they kind of reined in their expectations there, which in turn is why a bunch of people that you would have talked to about this movie didn't see it in the theaters.
Yeah. So I actually looked it up, and it was like only about 300 theaters in the entire United States picked up the movie.
That's a pretty limited release.
Yeah, so that's pretty limited. It was, and for the exact reasons you said, because they had already made their money, so like, screw the States. And you know what? Good for them, because we often get sort of the ahead of the game, while the other countries in the international release are usually behind. So it's about time we got our comeuppance. And, but anyway, great cast, starring Christian Bale as head grammaton cleric, or I guess he's not the head cleric, but he's like the most decorated one. They mention that a couple of times. He's the guy.
Well, for at least certain things. Like we said, he's pretty stupid.
He's pretty stupid.
He's really good at killing people.
He's great at killing people, and he's really good at figuring out where sense offenders hide their stuff.
Yep. I'm going to guess he just has a natural affinity for it, and not any actual thought goes into it.
It's probably like one of those guys who's like dumb as bricks, but then he can do his job really well because he's not bogged down by all that thought. No, we kid. All right, he plays John Preston, grammaton cleric. Then we start with his partner in the very beginning. Now, this guy decided that he was going to do a small part in this film. I think it was as a favor for the director. And you want to talk about somebody who knocked it out of the park, Sean Bean. Well,
it's kind of him doing his normal thing, is showing at the beginning, being awesome, and then getting killed.
Yeah, I mean, every scene he was... I almost want to say he was too talented to be in this movie, because he stole every scene he was in. It's a good thing he was just in the beginning, because if he was supposed to be opposite Christian Bale this entire time, and I love Chris Bale, I do, but there's no way people would have been calling it a Christian Bale movie.
If it was almost like a buddy cop.
Yeah. Because he stole the show. Like, I mean, knowing what I know now, when you go back and watch it, and from the very beginning he's been a sense offender, to see just the look on his face, even as they're pulling up, as he's like getting ready for like Preston to go jumping through the door in a phenomenal one shot. By the way, that whole running, jumping through the door, blowing out the hinges and everything, one shot. That was one shot, and a camera went around the wall, swung around to the front. A beautiful cinematography.
You seem to talk about the cinematography a lot when I'm here with you.
I do. I don't understand what it is about your movies and the cinematography. But, and and the thing is I try so hard not to talk about cinematography on Hero Talk. It's like, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're not those kind of critics, in fact, not critics at all. Our scores are absolutely meaningless, and we just talk out of our butts half the time. But it's a great single shot, and I mean, it's one of those things where you can point out, like, oh, the story had some silliness, and, gun fu wouldn't actually work, but you see shots like that, and it's very hard to not fall in love with the movie when you see it.
Well, anyway, as for Sean Bean's performance, I think if you're going to have a particularly heavy hitter on the cast, that's probably the best spot to have him, because he's got one of the most, it's not a huge part. I mean, like I said, he gets killed almost right away. But it has some of the most intricate elements to it, where he has to start laying down hints really early, which are those little looks that he has of being kind of upset that the art is being burned and all of that.
Yeah.
And he's got to give a performance that would make you believe that Christian Bale's John Preston might start not taking the prosium that suppresses the emotions.
Right.
That's and he does it. Like he when Bale figures it out, when John Preston figures it out and starts tracking down Sean Bean, he gives a reading of poetry that somehow gets through all of the conditioning that Preston has, and just starts getting under his skin. And at first, there's a bit of not exactly clear if it was intentional or not that he missed one of his doses, but it's possible that he was rattled from his experience killing his partner. I don't suppose you could use the word friend in this case, but it all just got to him to the point where either he chose not to, or he did something weird that resulted in him not taking it, and then he just stayed off it and sort of wrote it.
Yeah, I interpreted that as sort of, he subconsciously put his dose somewhere where he was sure to knock it off, because he wanted an excuse to miss a dose, even though his creepy punk kid was right there.
Telling him to go to Equilibrium?
Equilibrium? No. Oh man, how do you let this kid mispronounce the name of the movie? I mean, and it's the only time the words equilibrium are spoken in the film is when this kid's doing it, and he says equilibrium the whole time. I don't understand. Plus, his kid is a punk, man. You don't answer this kid right away. He is all up in your business.
If you don't give him the answer that he wants, he'll ask you again, and it's quite clear what answer he wants.
Doesn't it kind of feel like the kid's in charge
in
that
yes,
household?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like he looked. Yeah, Preston looks rattled by him. Like, sorry, sir. Like, it's really weird just how off his game, how off guard he is when the kid's questioning him. And it's like, he's just a kid.
You know, some of it makes a little bit of sense because he's off his dose. He's probably going to be rattled by almost anything he sees. And his kid is one of those kids that stands there on the streets and points out people that they think are sense offenders, even though I think they're just pointing at random people because no one knows how to do anything in this world.
Yeah, as though you could just tell just by people walking by. I mean, wouldn't it make sense at some point that somebody could come off their dose and just be like, well, and then there's that, and then just go about their day? I would imagine there'd be more sense offenders. And also, I would imagine that if I was a sense offender in this world, I would make my home base of operation further than a day's drive outside of Libria. You know, make it so they actually have to look quite a while before they find you. Like, they're finding people, and it's like, it's one day, they're there, they clean it out, and they come back. And I mean, and given that they keep the access to the, I almost said the Narrows, because Chris Bale has me thinking Batman. They almost keep the entrance to the Nether. It's so guarded. I mean, who's sneaking out? I kind of got the impression that the people in the Nether just live in the Nether. Like, they're not coming back and forth to Libria. That's just where they live.
Yeah, that's one of those things that feels a lot like 1984, where they had I forget what they call them or what the area is, but you've got your inner city where the party and all of the workers are, and then they got the, I don't know, plebes or whatever further outside the city in their own area. I kind of feel like the existence of the Nethers was essentially a reference to that.
Yeah, I just don't understand, like, why they kept finding people, like, right there. And I assume Libria is somewhere in Western Europe, mostly because everything in the movie is from Germany, because that's where they filmed it. So I'm presuming that they have a lot of German influence because they're in where Germany used to be.
Yeah. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily matter just where it is. It could be anywhere. But it also begs the question, is Libria a city-state unto itself? Is it just like the only place that's still holding itself together while the rest of the world is falling apart and there's just a few people right outside the city? Or are there other nation states out there that Libria isn't in contact with? I mean, it's another one of these post-apocalyptic themes where exactly how do you know how bad it is that far away?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for all we know, the United States is basically all like Fallout. All right, so moving on, because we can't talk about how awesome Sean Bean is all night. Well, we could, but that's not very interesting. We have a smallish role, but just somebody I want to touch on. We have Sean Pertwee, and I think it's Pertwee. Plays Father. By the way, Father's not real. He's dead, and he's just a hologram. But it's really odd seeing this, because you have Christian Bale, who obviously makes me think of Batman, and you have Sean Pertwee, who I've been seeing lately playing Alfred in the new TV show Gotham. So you can see why I'm saying the Narrows and I got like Batman on the brain, because you got so many people in this movie that are referencing Batman in my head.
Yeah.
It's very hard to distance them from themselves, especially for a movie that when I even saw it the first time, I openly admit, I thought, hey, this would make Chris Bale a good Batman. So, I mean, this was basically his Batman audition tape.
Interesting side note, Sean Pertwee is actually related to one of the old Doctor Who actors. I think it was the third one. But yeah, you just see him in some footage, like little telescreens letting out speeches to the people, or those weird holographic boxes. Those were a little weird.
Yeah, well, was the point, were they trying to convince people that he was actually physically there?
I think when I first saw it, I thought that's what they were trying to do, and it was just supposed to be like a secured box like the Pope Mobile.
Right. That's what I thought.
But it also just looks, it didn't necessarily look fake while it was on, but the whole arrangement just seemed so forced that, like, it kind of strikes me that no one would fall for that, and it was intentionally just supposed to be like a more realistic projection. And it was known that it was a projection.
But I thought about that, but what struck me as odd is if everyone knows that's a projection, why are there 4 guards guarding the projector?
Maybe it's a expensive projector.
We can't have people. Yeah, there's a lot of armed guards wandering around Libya, by the way, for a state that's supposed to have already, like, gotten rid of violence and wiped themselves of emotion. You have a lot of guards wandering around.
That's true.
For people who shouldn't actually have any issues. And also, does Father basically just run speeches 24/7? Because in just about every outdoor scene, you can hear him saying something or other. Their screens are everywhere. In his apartment, the kids watching, like, Father just talk about, like, how bad the 20th century was. It was really kind of odd. Like, you know, other than the fact that you're trying to set the scene for me, the outside viewer, like, do people in Libya really need the constant reminder of what prosium is and how it works? And how good it is? Like, do they forget? Is that just what goes on? Because they don't have all those feelings, so they just say, by the way, yeah, you have to take prosium.
Well, maybe part of the issue is that when you get rid of their feelings, they get rid of the feeling of being compelled to take the drug.
Maybe.
I don't know. Anytime you start talking about not having emotions, there's a weird lack of definition of exactly what that means. Is it just like really, really strong emotions? Like at one point when they're discussing prosium, they say it removes the big highs and the big lows. Does it get rid of everything, or does it have like a threshold limit or something? Or are we going to be labeling ambition as an emotion, in which case ain't no one going to try as hard at killing to get as good at it as John Preston is.
Right.
You just wouldn't care enough.
And speaking of that leads us into another major character in this film, which was Taye Diggs as Britt, who shows an awful lot of emotion for somebody who is ostensibly on the dose, as far as I can tell. I mean, I guess towards the end of the movie, it kind of gets implied that he is off the dose.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of ways you can take this, and that's actually one of the things I think is to the movie's credit, where there are multiple reasonable explanations you can give, and it's not explicit that either he's just a guy who has a nice smile and it's just something he does there, but there's actually no emotion behind it, which is really creepy. Yeah. Or in one of those early scenes before you see him smiling, he has a line about, I need to go get my dose adjusted. And because he got partnered with Christian Bale, they took him off the dose, and that's when he starts getting all smiley, because they took him off the dose basically as a promotion.
Right. I mean, it was just kind of odd to see him smile. And then, like, towards later scenes where he's yelling and like, showing some outward emotion. And I can understand when, like, Chris Bale's showing emotion, but it's because he can't handle it. But when people are doing this, like, out in the open around people who think that nobody's supposed to have emotions, it's not really... Now, we've already established, John Preston, for this movie to work, he has to be dumb. So the fact that he's out rearranging his desk and doing all this stuff out in the open, like, that's dumb because he's dumb. He starts hiding his dose physically behind his bathroom mirror because he's dumb, instead of getting rid of it completely altogether.
Like he did the first time. Like he did
the first time, in a way that seemed to work pretty well for him.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, like, well, let me find a way to get rid of my dose that leads to much more physical evidence. Whatever, John. You just stick with what you know. I actually quite like Taye Diggs in this movie, and it's kind of because of his smile, and I know that's weird, and the director said the same thing. He actually hired him because he really liked his smile, and he's like, I know we're going to get flack because he's smiling in a movie where it's not about emotion, but I liked it, and it worked, and the director felt it was sort of an empty smile, like you said, in a way that kind of makes it a little more sinister, in that here's this guy who's smiling at you, and it doesn't mean a single thing to him. It's just a facial tick, basically. So we're gonna just go on down the cast list, because there's a lot of guys, and here's another major character that we really need to talk about is Angus McFadden. He plays DuPont, which is, and I actually tried to look this up, like, I can't remember exactly what his title was. It was something weird, like the Vice Counsel.
Yeah, that's one of those things. He doesn't have the actual title that would imply he's at the top, so whatever it is after that doesn't exactly matter. I seem to remember a third in there somewhere, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, like a third vice counsel I don't know, it was a really weird kind of arbitrary title. Although it's basically implied that he's Father's right-hand man, until later in the movie when it's basically outright said that he is Father.
Yeah. He just admits it, and the charade is all up.
I mean, I guess it was a fun scene. You sort of saw something happening with the Father angle because you never actually saw him, and you had to figure there was some sort of twist in there because you'd already tried a couple of twists in the movie already.
Yeah.
In terms of twists, that one isn't bad.
Yeah, but at the same time, it is, while it's not bad as a twist, it's also one of those, another one of those points that's basically straight off of 1984. It's basically Big Brother.
Basically, yeah. But I mean, it was fun to see him in there. I liked him. I kind of I like the whole character now. It's pretty well established, even from about the midway point in the movie. DuPont is basically straight up off the dose. He's not even going through the pretense of being on the dose anymore. He is just screaming and yelling and pounding, and Preston doesn't even notice because he's dumb.
Yeah. For someone who's supposed to find sense offenders and understand how they behave, he's really bad at spotting it. And that's actually something that DuPont pointed out, because his wife was a sense offender and they were together for years and he never noticed. And DuPont points out, well, this is your job. That's kind of inexcusable.
Yeah. That's sort of a big deal there, Preston.
But at the same time, they right before he goes overboard and starts actually openly screaming at Preston, they actually do, and it's almost disappointing because it's set up in a good way, because right as Preston's getting off the dose, one of the first things he does is take off his gloves so he can just touch a handrail and feel it. And you actually get a shot of, earlier in the conversation, DuPont does the same thing with his desk. He trails his fingers on the desk as he's walking around it, just feeling it. And that shot's in there specifically showing his fingers, so that I feel confident that was intentional, an intentional reference. And then literally about 10 seconds later, he slams his fist down on the desk and screams at Preston. It's like, that just undid any subtlety you had.
Yeah.
I mean, you could make the argument that he is trying to, he's not, obviously, but you could look at that and say he's trying to fake being angry to rattle someone who just got off the Prosium. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, I mean,
he's just not being very subtle.
Yeah, basically. He's just not subtle about it. And now, I don't mind the idea that he's off the dose, because it really does seem like his inner council of the people he surrounds himself with, they all know he's off the dose.
They have to.
Yeah, I mean, they have to. I mean, for one thing, his office is filled with the kind of stuff that they consider contraband.
Oh, yeah. Paintings and ornate columns and beautiful marble and...
Yeah, so anybody who would work around there has to know. And so you really wonder, what's going through the heads of these guards? I mean, because if Preston is on the dose, then you have to figure, this isn't something where it's just, the established powers are off the dose and only the citizens are, because, Preston was on the dose and was expected to be on the dose. So, at what point in this upper echelon, where is the line for the inner circle of, these are the people who know that, the high uppity-ups? Because I have to assume nobody else on the council doses. I would just imagine that they were all feeling whatever, because, why would DuPont feel so special?
Well, that was another one of the points that of the movie, or at least one of the ideas in it, is that you get dictators like that, they're going to be hypocritical to their own rules. So, yeah, there's probably going to be some... First of all, obviously, DuPont isn't dosing, and obviously he's a hypocrite about the whole thing. And even in his final speech, he basically implies that anybody dosing isn't a real person. But... One of the, like you said, there's going to be some upper echelon or some inner circle that's got the privilege of not dosing. And that's why I think that might be what happened with Taye Diggs, is that when they assigned him to Christian Bale, that was his promotion to the inner circle and granted him liberty to not have to dose.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you figure, you have, the normal, I'll just call them stormtrooper guards, but, the bike helmet, the motorcycle helmet guards. Yeah, the sweeper guys.
I think that's what they were called.
So those guys that are assigned to him, do you think they have to dose? Or
that are assigned to him, or that
like the ones that are in his office that can clearly see what's going on. Do you figure they have to dose, or what? Or maybe...
I would assume they would be considered some degree of elite to be assigned as his personal bodyguard troop.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a point that I actually have never really thought about until now, that, where does the line end? Where do the authority who's dosing end and the authority who's considered the inner circle who doesn't have to dose begin? They gotta be out there.
I think you're putting too much thought into it now.
I do think I'm putting way too much thought into it. So let's go to something with a little bit less thought. Who else is in this movie? He was in the movie as Daniel Lee. His actual full actor name now is Danny Lee Clark. He was the lead sweeper. He was the guy who kept asking Preston to check his trunk when the puppy was in the trunk. and he is none other than American Gladiator Nitro. So that's just a fun little thing to point out that, I mean, you can't see his face in the movie. Like, the most you see of it is when the bike helmet visor's up, but you don't see very much of him. I didn't know it was him at all, so I'm not some American Gladiator aficionado who saw Daniel Lee and knew. I watched the director's commentary, and he basically said, like, yeah, that's Nitro.
Well, that's a thing that happened.
Yeah, and probably what was one of my favorite scenes, I think, in the movie in terms of action sequences, because I kind of liked how it worked out, and it was one of those few scenes, and there was a couple of these in the film which I really liked, which is there were at some points in the movie when a person like got into it so bad and they were in like some real trouble, they almost like the negative emotion of self-preservation almost overtook the prosium. Because you get a lot of guys who, like, when the chips are down, are like, uh-oh, and then they're like, they start freaking out. And I've decided that that's not inconsistent directing. That is actual, like, fear overcoming the prosium.
Yeah, you'll drop an expletive, even if you're on the drug, if the A1 tetragrammaton cleric is going to kill you, has decided that you're going to die because you know you're going to die.
Yeah, if he's flipped your own gun around on you.
Yeah,
it is now.
That's another that's one of those little shots. They had two sweepers, each with shotguns pointed at Preston's head, and he hit them so they spun in midair so that he could grab them by the handles in midair and just shoot them in the face.
Right.
That is a nice shot.
It's actually a really fun shot. As much as I don't want to condone somebody getting shot in the face with a shotgun, it was a really fun sort of action sequence when that happens, and then he got to do some shooting out in the narrow nethers.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna call it the narrow nethers now because I'm bound to call it the narrows at some point. So yeah, but that was actually a fun scene, and there's a lot of fun stuff like that where he did some trick gunplay. What I like about this movie, as long as we're talking about action right now, is it really seemed like each action sequence kind of had its own little twist to it.
That's true.
You never really saw the same thing more than once. Like if the guys all lined up around him so he could shoot them all in a circle, they didn't line up the same way the next time around.
Kind of, yeah. There is the one in the opening, there is the one there in the narrows where, there's a lot more tension because he's in an openly compromised position and he's trying to maintain, his own, cover, I guess you'd call it. There was the one where he was pistol whipping a bunch of sweepers.
Yep.
That one was kind of weird. There was the rampage through through the central. Oh, that whole thing was crazy.
Yeah.
And the duel with DuPont.
Right.
And then there was the run and gun sequences.
Oh, that's true. And there was the training sequence with Brandt.
Yes, that's true too. That one had slipped I was thinking of gunplay in particular, so that one slipped my mind.
Yeah. What I like of that scene is because that scene with Brandt sets up the final confrontation with Brandt, where you think you're going to get another fight like that, but what they're trying to say is, and what the polygraph was supposed to show to you was like, well, when they were training before, Preston's all conflicted and he can't control his own emotions, and in that one moment when DuPont keeps taunting him, and the poly goes straight, that's him now. Hey, guess what? I just figured out emotions, how to control them.
It's either he figured out emotions or his rage flipped over, and it's like the high score rolling over in a game.
Yeah, that was really great when that happens, and especially when the guy running the poly figures it out and knows exactly why that just happened.
And another expletive from him. Yeah. Although interestingly, he's the one that Preston did not kill, probably because he knew he was just a guy doing his job.
Yeah. Although I could argue that guy being in the room and knowing what he knew and being able to like be right there as DuPont says who he really is, he's probably one of the inner circle who probably doesn't have to dose.
That is a distinct possibility.
Yeah, it's a new way to look at the movie when you think about like who do you think, like watch the movie and think who's good enough they don't have to dose.
Now, that's another thing to the movie's credit. That's one of those things you can watch and think about.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in this movie. It's not, well, we point out that Preston's dumb and just about everything he does is stupid, except for figuring out where the sense offenders hide things and killing people. There's a lot that was really good to the movie, and I think it's the strength of the movie, and it almost makes you really wish they had just tightened up those story elements a little bit more. Because that's the difference between a cult classic that everyone kind of likes and a phenomenal movie that people repeatedly go back to over and over again.
I'm not exactly sure this movie really has anything of its own to say, though. Because it takes so much from other things. In terms of message, it doesn't add much to it. So I'm not sure this would ever transcend, fun kind of cult classic movie, because
well, maybe not, but I think it could have been more fun and gotten a larger
people would go back and reference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. 'Cause, I mean, basically anything that people would go back and reference, they could really just go back and just say, well, just go to 1984.
Yeah.
Because that's probably where they did it first, or any of those other movies. But
the only thing you could really take from this is the gun kata or gun fu.
Yeah. I should probably get used to calling it gun kata, because gun fu is sort of what they use to refer to what John Woo does, and all of that stuff. But I just love the phrase, so I use it to describe the gun kata.
Yeah.
Which I think Kurt Wimmer had some status in figuring out. I like the idea of the gun kata. I actually think it's a lot of fun, even though it's stupid, ridiculous, and wouldn't actually work in any real situations.
Yeah, whenever I talk about this movie, the acceptance of the concept of gun kata seems to be your great litmus test of who would be able to stomach this movie. If you can get past that idea, you'll probably enjoy this movie. And if you can't, then you won't enjoy this movie. So if anyone out there is thinking of showing this movie to someone, that's the question to ask. Just tell them that, okay, there's this thing called gun kata. And if they don't yell at you at that point, then you explain that the idea is that there was a lot of analysis of gunfights, and they've determined that if you fire at these angles and these sequences and move in these ways, you're most likely to hit people without getting shot back. And then if they still say, oh, that's obviously unrealistic, but you could have some fun with that, then yes, they will have fun watching this movie.
Right. Because that's exactly what I thought of gun kata, is like, oh, that is absolutely dumb, but I'm willing to ride this train and see where it goes. So another person we got to talk about, we have a few more people in the cast that we cannot gloss over. We have Emily Watson as Mary O'Brien, and I really kind of wish she had more to do, because she basically just gets arrested and then spends the rest of the movie appearing in interrogation sequences until she dies in a scene that really seemed to be sort of artificially designed to be emotional.
Yeah.
What really strikes me about the scene is when Preston runs up on the scene. It's like, I need to question this person. I'm a Grammaton cleric. You got to get her out of there. The guard says, "Oh, the time lock's engaged. If we open it now, then it'll blow at street level." Like, what kind of design is that?
This is the worst
Who makes
execution
turbines
chamber
like
ever.
that? Why would you even build it?
Your fail-safe for turning off the mechanism to not kill the sentenced person, the fail-safe involves killing a bunch of people on the street. That's not a fail-safe.
Why would you set it up that way? Why not have it blow into the nethers, or like at 1,000 feet in the air?
Why? I mean, it's under that huge underground tunnel. Why is it in the middle of the city? Yeah, you're right. Why isn't it under the nethers? The only possible explanation is that there's like a central heater or furnace for the entire city, and it's just a chamber that they shove people into.
Yeah.
So you can't turn it off or something.
Right. I mean, it's basically the only reason they would even set it up that way is so Chris Bale would have to be there and watch her burn.
Mm-hmm.
And also, to be honest, I didn't like. It's very much implied that Preston gets feelings for her, and a little bit because she reminds him of one of his wives. I say one of his wives, not because Preston had multiple wives, but because there were multiple actresses played Preston's wife in this movie. There was the one who was in the scene where she gets arrested, and there was one that was in the scene where he was watching the footage of her trial. And those were two different actresses, because I guess they couldn't get the one actress back for another day. They figure like, well, she's wearing a hood in the trial, no one's gonna notice. And to be honest, until I saw the credits, I didn't notice. So
you won't notice.
Yeah, unless you watch the director's commentary, and then he's gonna point that out, and then you're gonna notice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it's just. I mean, is that it? Should I not read into that? Does she just remind him of his wife now that he's feeling he remembers he likes his wife?
Too much that she reminded him of his wife. I did kind of get the sense of a certain sense of infatuation between that bit where he kind of almost kisses her. They have that, elongated shot, and the bit where he carries her ribbon around with him and smells it every so often. Mm-hmm. The ribbon he stole from evidence.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was supposed to be having feelings for her or he just didn't understand how feelings worked in general.
Yeah. Because she had a relationship with his partner that he killed, Errol Partridge, Sean Bean, from the beginning of the movie. And
Yeah, she was his widow.
yeah, so I mean that made it a little bit interesting, but it was I just didn't quite. It felt like if you're gonna get Emily Watson in to do this role, you ought to give her more to do. Because it just felt like she didn't have a whole lot going on, that didn't really need to be Emily Watson.
Well, maybe they added more interrogation scenes for that.
Maybe. All right, so one last guy, and then we can finally put the cast to bed and talk about whatever parts of the movie that we haven't actually talked about yet.
Yeah, speaking of Batman.
Yeah, so now we have William Fichtner as Jurgen, who played the bank teller at the mob bank at the beginning of The Dark Knight, in what was one of my favorite scenes from The Dark Knight. That was the scene that really, I mean, wasn't that the one that they kept showing to everybody, like, in the sneak previews, when they kept having those, they just showed that scene?
It was that whole sequence, and in the IMAX releases, that was the IMAX releases for Dark Knight had some scenes in IMAX and some not, but that whole sequence was shot in full IMAX.
It was, and I saw The Dark Knight in IMAX more than once, and gorgeously done scene. If you don't have William Fichtner in that scene, it doesn't quite work.
No,
he's phenomenally talented, and he was very good as Jurgen in this movie. Now,
and this role as Jurgen has some subtlety to it as well, almost the inverse of Partridge, of Sean Bean's role.
Yeah, exactly. Now this guy, and I was very heavily under the impression, and he almost comes out and says it, but he doesn't quite. I think it's kind of implied Jurgen's on the dose.
Yeah.
Like
he's the one who says that he doesn't feel so that other people can.
Yeah, like he believes in feeling, but he understands that in order to blend in order to, not be giving away, and in order to do what he has to do, he stays on the dose so that he can still go up and among people. And in fact, I almost missed this the first time I saw the movie. In the opening scene when Sean Bean and Chris Bale's characters are coming back from the very first trip out to the Nether, and Father's giving his speech where he's reminding everybody about the history of Libria, which I imagine he probably does every Tuesday afternoon, I suppose. When he's like, Libria, you have won, and it jumps up, Jurgen is the first guy who stands up and does the standing applause for Father. I mean, he's
interesting.
Right there. Yeah, he's right there. He's in that part. Stands up, does the clap. That was all Jurgen.
I'm gonna count that as another one of those little touches that this movie's kind of full of.
Yeah, and that was very, very on purpose, very intentional to do that. The director mentions it in his commentary that, you probably might have seen him earlier if you thought about it, and he's there, and he's the guy who stands up and claps. So I think that's very heavily implied in that he takes his dose because he can work better in terms of managing the underground topside if he's on his dose and he's not actually feeling.
Yeah, and when he's talking, he does a great job of conveying that he's not emotional, but right behind that, it's like his heart is crushed. He's just mortified by the fact that he doesn't feel.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've rounded out the cast, and we've talked about a lot of these action set pieces, let's talk through a little bit of the story and some of the elements of the story that stood out to me. The biggest one, and I touched on this earlier, the sense offenders that they go out and that they kill. Seems like these guys are just outside Libria, because it's always like a day trip.
Couple hours.
Yeah,
really.
They go out, they sweep them through, they find all their stuff, they burn it on the spot, and then they keep these people for processing. And it just seems like everybody just gets burned anyway. I don't really understand. Like, even if it's like, if you interrogate, I'll see that they go easy on you. Like, wait a minute. Now, everybody just gets burned. Have they gone easy on
because
anybody?
They have a flamethrower with them when they go out on patrol, and instead of using that to just burn up the sense offenders on the spot, they bring them in so that they can burn them in a wildly less safe chamber.
Yeah, it really, it seemed like when they got towards the end, they're like, Father said now we have to crack down, so we need to kill them all on sight. Like, isn't that functionally what we've been doing? Even when we arrest them, don't we just take them back to kill them? And we kill a lot of these people on the scene, too. I mean, Preston walked in there at the one opening sequence, and he just killed everybody.
Oh, yeah.
He was not trying to take anybody prisoner, so it really didn't feel like it was all that outside of what they were already doing.
But apparently there is some fancy of due process still alive in Libria.
Yeah, even though it just feels like for sense offending, we are going to sentence you to incineration. And everyone seems to just go along with that. Like, that seems like a bad way to die. I would almost rather just get shot in the head for resisting.
Yeah.
Like, what? Just cause a scene and get yourself... Get yourself shot.
And especially, like, how much due process is associated with the kids that point out people on the street?
It really did feel like those kids point to somebody and then the guards just grab them and go.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, are those people just summarily burned or whatever? But
well, it was enough to make Preston uncomfortable when they said summarily execute them out in the field.
Yeah, he did seem unnaturally uncomfortable with that. I'm just going back to Preston's kid one more time. I understand that this kid, he's supposed to be implied that he's like constantly evaluating his father and that he's actually really smart and he himself has been off the dose for such a long time. But this kid creeps me out, and I don't like him. He's not in the good, fun way, in the, like, I hate every time this kid is in the scene.
Yeah, it partially just because of how grating he is to Preston the whole time. He's very not endearing, because earlier on in the movie, he comes across as a point of threat.
Right.
Because he could expose Preston because he's one of those kids that's in line to be a cleric and he's, pointing out sex offenders.
Right.
So they would have us believe. But then later on, you find out he hasn't been taking his dose. And so now he's supposed to be sympathetic. And it's really grating as a viewer to have to swap like that, because there wasn't much endearing about him in the first place. He was very robotic and antagonistic the whole time.
Right. And then when you watch it in subsequent viewings, knowing that he was off the dose the whole time, it makes the first parts seem all the more disconnected from the rest of it, because it's just, what are you doing? I said, what are you doing? You need to
it
go
drives
to
you away from the kid and toward Preston. It does a good job of making Preston sympathetic.
Yeah.
But having to accept the kid later after using his presence in that way doesn't feel right.
It makes it harder. Now, the little girl, you kind of got the feeling she was a sex offender. Of
yeah,
course,
because she played with her cereal and whatnot.
But of course, Preston didn't have any idea. He's a moron.
Of course not.
And I actually saw a lot of people on some message boards, and forgive me for going on message boards, but it was 2002, I'm allowed. I saw a lot of people on message boards saying, like, oh, how could nobody tell that little girl wasn't taking her dose? I'm like, oh, well, I kind of got the idea that she was a little too young to have started school, and Preston's an idiot. So when you combine those two things, that little girl could go off the dose and nobody was going to notice.
Yeah.
This was kind of weird. When Preston is sleeping in his apartment there, he basically sleeps on top of the blanket without a pillow. Like, that's nuts. Like, and it didn't, I kind of watched to see if there, like, maybe he tossed the pillow, but he didn't. And at first I thought, like, hey, well, maybe, I didn't even know that there was anything on the mattress. I thought, like, they're like, oh, well, blankets and pillows were too much of a feeling. But first the kids had blankets and pillows, and on his wife's side of the bed, there's no blanket or pillow, but they're like, it's just a bare mattress. It's not what he's sleeping on. So his bed is clearly made with some sort of bedding, but man, that was just so weird that he sleeps like that. Like, that felt unnecessary. Like, body temperature regulation, that still exists, even if you don't feel.
Well, maybe as a high-ranking cleric, he's got a pretty good HVAC system, and they use it as an excuse to just show off Christian Bale without a shirt on.
Yeah, I thought he was wearing a shirt, actually.
No, he woke up drenched in sweat.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe he wasn't. Well, you know what? He works out quite a bit, so good for him. And then he manages to go and he pulls the stuff off his window, because I guess looking at the view was considered a sense offense, or was... So they just had like a little bit of contact paper on the inside of everybody's windows rather than having it be frosted laminate between panes of glass or something. Right. Like, I mean, it's so crazy because there are ways you can do that where you can't just rip it down. Now, I get it's a movie. You need to give him that part of the movie so that he can rip the stuff down and be clear, but... And this, you know what? This drives me nuts. He gets like the majority of the stuff off the window, and then he almost claws kind of radically at some little tiny piece that's left. And then he's like, all right, now I'm good. And there's these other large pieces that are still on the window that he seems perfectly okay with. Like, you just went off like a psychopath on this little strip that was still there, and you have these larger chunks that are still on the window that you're not going to even touch now. Like,
maybe because they weren't immediately in front of his face.
I guess. I don't know. It was enough to kind of jar me the first time I saw it, and it doesn't get better with each subsequent viewing. I still think, why are you are you so worried about that one piece and not any of the others? But yeah, I just, Preston didn't really strike me as too swift, and so maybe I shouldn't put too much stock in that. Maybe it's just the answer is Preston's dumb. Now, I want to just talk about the underground for a second, because there's a scene in here I want to really point out. But this whole making contact with the underground, like, Preston is not all that smart. We've established that. He's not. And when he finally does make contact with the underground, it wasn't that hard for him when you think about it. Like, he figured out his partner liked to read, so he went to the library and basically threw a guy through a wall, and he found the underground.
Well, I mean, he is a savant at finding contraband, so yeah, secret entrance, I guess, would count.
Yeah, it just struck me as kind of odd, and then they take him to the underground, which is literally underground.
Yeah, and it's not even all that well hidden. There's a grate about 10 feet above them that's open to the street and people walking over them.
Yeah, it's not deep underground. It's literally just underground. Like, if somebody accidentally dropped something heavy, it would fall into the underground's base.
Or if you drop a pen down that grate, it would hit one of them in the head.
Yeah. I mean, it was not very well hidden, and then they have all this stuff, and it's like, well, wouldn't it be smarter for you guys to go outside the city? Or maybe that's where they look, so maybe it is smarter to keep it inside the city. I don't know. But then, they have all these leaders. Now, there's a scene in here, after Preston pulls the switch that doesn't really work, and he finally decides, like, oh, I want to see Father. His whole point is, like, he has to kill Father, because that's part of the plan. So he has to kill Father, in what seemed kind of odd that he would need to kill Father, because the underground already seemed to have bombs at every single place where they made Prosium. So you would think they would also have bombs at wherever Father's broadcasting from, or at least be able to figure out where. Like, they're so connected, yet they can't touch Father, and they're not going to make a single move till they have Father. Even though they established towards the end of the movie, like right at the very end, that they have a pretty sizable standing army.
Yeah, that's another one of the holes that you probably shouldn't think too hard about.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be that connected and not know that Father doesn't exist and it's all actually DuPont.
Yeah.
They just suddenly get almost irritatingly effective in their assault at the end of the movie, because they're just dying by the dozens earlier. And then, oh, Father's down. Now we attack, and there's a coordinated assault in all these different positions. And you see sweepers just getting mowed down.
Yeah, like, it really makes you think, so why did you guys need Preston?
Maybe they just had a tremendous morale problem.
That's really what it just comes down to. They're like, oh, there's no point in attacking. That's the problem with going off your dose, Nick, is that you get these downs where you get so depressed you're not going to do the job, guys.
Maybe some of the problem is that Preston and Partridge and all of them found all the good emotional content material, and they're stuck down there in the underground with Philip Glass recordings and stuff.
They're getting, like, all those emo poems that kids were writing in high school before World War III.
Oh.
Boy, yeah. But, so there's this scene where, like, he's going to give up the underground. And so this was odd. So, in the director's commentary, the scene where he's on the phone and everyone's kind of around him, the director said that was an homage to a certain film. And he said, I will give a case of beer to anyone who figures out what it's an homage to.
Then if you have to bet for people to find out what's going on, you're probably not doing it well enough.
Right. Now, I looked over the internet in 2002. I looked over the internet in 2014 to see if anybody knew what he was talking about. Nobody knows what movie he's talking about. If somebody knows, toss it in the comments on Enthusiacs.com, because I have no idea what he was trying to say and what movie that was supposed to be. I don't get it. Because it's just people sitting at the table with Preston on the phone. It's like, that's in like 1,000 movies.
Well, maybe it's something to do with the cinematography.
Maybe. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know if maybe you had heard that somewhere in your various travels. Yeah, I remember it from the director's commentary, and I Googled, Equilibrium director's commentary, case of beer scene, and it gives you some pretty weird stuff. But I never found anything about it, and I was just curious because I have no idea what he was trying to reference there.
Yeah, I never even saw that referenced on TV tropes, and those people are maniacal about making any connection they can.
Yeah, they are. So maybe it's just it's too obscure, or he just didn't do a very good homage to it, so it wasn't good enough for anyone to pick up on it.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. So when all like the Prosium factories blow up, all of the resistance leaders were in the tunnels there, which was like an old subway in Germany, I think. Kind of looks like it a little bit. Anyway, it was the great locations for this movie, by the way, because the places they
beautiful.
go. Yeah, I mean it looks like it would be, and it's all basically in Berlin. So kind of makes me want to go to Berlin. In fact, they used a lot of like German cars and German stuff, but there was a lot of places that they were built for the 1936 Olympics.
Huh. That puts an interesting spin on things when you know
it does
that.
A little
I didn't
bit,
know that.
Especially because the Tetragrammaton flag, in addition to kind of looking like a cross, sort of looks a little bit like a swastika.
Yes, it does.
So it is kind of interesting that like they're kind of this Nazi-esque leadership in a lot of places that were built literally by Nazi Germany. You have the resistance, and they're at the furnace, and they hear the explosions, and they kind of give the smile. Like at that point, when everything's going wrong and there's attacks all over the city, the guys running the furnace, do they still put the prisoners in the furnace, or do they maybe just go into lockdown and try to figure out what's going on? Like, do you think the resistance dies?
Maybe if they were really clever, they'd set the furnace to go and then open it so it would explode on the street.
That's what they could do. They could have ended this whole thing. We fixed it. You're welcome, Libria.
I like that version.
Yeah. How it should have ended could really jump on that right now if they wanted to. So let's do this end scene here, because this is a pretty decent point. I thought it was kind of interesting that you finally get to the end scene, and so Preston is in his dress whites with his ceremonial white sword. Now they take the white sword away, but they don't check him for guns. Like, do they just presume, like, oh, well, he clearly wouldn't have guns, he's in his dress whites. Guns aren't part of that uniform. Like, don't you check him for guns instead of just saying, like, we're going to take your sword at your word because we can't be too careful? But, except for checking you for guns. That would be way too careful.
That's just another one of those things in this movie that you can't think too hard about.
Yeah.
Because he had the pistols in the quick release things in his sleeve. Yep. Maybe that's a modification he did on his own, but I don't think he's handy enough for that. Maybe more people than just him are stupid.
Yeah. Maybe Jurgen made those for him. Maybe those don't actually, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe those aren't standard issue. Maybe Brant was supposed to be in charge of that, but he was having too much fun not being Ghost.
Oh, Brant. So
you just had to lean in and just rub it in.
Yeah, had to just
twist
the knife. And didn't want to stick around. That's what I kind of find odd, is because here's the guy who's ostensibly going to be your next A1 number 1 cleric. And, gets all gloaty now that he's feeling again. And then, so they're planning to take the guy who was the previous A1 number 1 cleric and, kill him, essentially. And DuPont's sitting there taunting him, but Brent has already left the room. Like, Brent's already like, well, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go down the hall to the pretty room.
Where the guy who's talking to you is talking.
Yeah. So he just kind of leaves and heads down there, and it's this craziness where, like, why don't you stick around and make sure that you actually take care of John? Or why don't you just shoot him in the back of the head right then and there, instead of having to taunt him first and let him know how much of a failure he is, and, like, how you made your career with him? Because by giving him that opportunity, you give him the chance to get himself centered again, and then he kills everybody you left around to kill him.
I mean, even beyond that, why wasn't the metal detector before the lie detector?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Yeah. You don't want to think too hard. Because it makes for a very, very fun action sequence. So, like, I don't want to point out all the reasons why it shouldn't work, because I want it to work, because I like the next sequence, where he, like, throws the two magazines down the hall, and then he's got his, and then he shoots, then he reloads from the things in his wrist, then he runs out of ammo, but then he reloads on the things on the ground, and then he's out, but then he, like, kicks up the gun and shoots the next guys, and then shoots through the door, and the other guy is standing on the other side of the door. Probably should have hit some of the clerics in that room, too.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. So I mean, that was a fun action sequence.
And that's another one. I keep in my head wanting to compare that to the bank raid scene that was all in slow-mo in The Matrix.
Right.
And both of those scenes are fun in different ways. But again, the one in Equilibrium just feels more grounded. It doesn't feel like, I don't think they used wires in this movie at all.
No, I don't believe they did at all.
Which is probably why it feels more grounded, because they definitely used wires in The Matrix.
Yes. I like that sequence. I like when he gets in the office. He probably shouldn't have been so surprised by the clerics coming out from behind the pillars
because he had to have seen them on the way in.
Yeah, he walked in the room. You literally walked right past two of them. And he gets so shocked. But then that kind of scene where he has no gun, because he didn't bring a gun in with him. I don't know why he wouldn't bring a gun in with him. There were guns laying right there in the front from the guards he just killed.
A lot of them.
Other than
every
the fact
person he killed, and there were a bunch of people he killed on the way in, each had a gun. And he's not above picking them up, because you saw him. He's certainly fine with using them, but no, he dropped it.
He dropped it, enters completely unarmed, just so we can get the next action scene, or the action sequence. I guess it's all part of the same scene. But he comes in, and he just for so that we can have the next action sequence, he does not bring a gun in with him, when he could have just ended the whole thing right there, while he had the big old gun, and be like, I'm just gonna shoot DuPont and Branch while I'm here. Through the door. I don't even need to go in this room.
And you're done.
Yeah. I'm right here. I have the big gun. I'm just gonna shoot them in this room. But the action sequence that came next, I actually quite enjoyed, where he takes the sword from one guy and the scabbard from the other guy, and he cuts the scabbard on one guy's sword to sharpen the end, and then does the double stabbing.
Yeah, he kind of like dodges and does a misdirection to actually help him do his next thing. That happens in a couple of other sequences, but that having the other guy sharpen his scabbard with a missed swing is a pretty nifty little touch, which he then uses to stab one of the two last guys.
Right. I have not seen that done in any other movies. Have you?
I don't think I have, but if I have, it would have been in an anime or something.
Yeah, I was trying to think of it because I thought it was very, very clever, and I thought I'm surprised more people haven't done that, because it was very clever and it was fun sequence. It was actually very similar to the one where he pistol whipped all the sweepers, because they were all in a tight circle around him. Mm-hmm.
But this time he didn't have any weapons. He had to steal a sword to get at them all. So again, it's another one of those fights that had a different flavor to it.
Mm-hmm.
He had a running gun and then a tight sword fight. And then the just one shot drop fight with Brandt immediately after.
Yeah, cut his face clean off, and it was so blatantly CGI, but it still worked because I thought it was fun, and because in the higher up shots, like the top down shots, you still see Brandt's face sitting next to him.
I wonder if his face on the floor was a CGI insert or like a photo that they just laid down on the floor.
You think they maybe just took a mold of like Tay Diggs' face and just dropped it down? Because at that
I'm not sure they even took a mold. I think they might have just like printed out a headshot and cut out around his face like one of those old cereal box masks. And just laid that down on the floor.
I mean, that's all you need. There was no depth to it because this was a very high up shot, and obviously by that point, Tay Diggs is not the guy on the ground anymore. Now it's just some guy you hired.
Yeah, they wanted to make that fight more elaborate, but they couldn't get Tay Diggs for enough time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it works for what they were trying to say is, hey, the last time we fought, it was, I was all over the place, but now that I'm focused, we're not equals.
Yeah.
Plus, you know what, it led to another part of the fight and something that we hadn't actually seen before, which is two practitioners of gun kata trying to out-gun kata each other.
Yeah, and it was an interesting sequence to watch because they were dueling with pistols at hand-to-hand range, and they were just constantly working to parry each other. There's an occasional shot here or there where they thought they might have had an angle, but their hands and their pistols are just deflecting each other constantly.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to watch.
Yeah, it was very fun to watch. I'm kind of glad if I'm assuming based on, the fact that Tay Diggs couldn't do the big fuller fight scene that was, well, if we can't do that, then we'll just have a DuPont and Preston fight at the end. And if that was the case, I think that was the way to go, because it was really great. And then you get this fun sequence at the end where you get to play it back, where DuPont gets to beg for his life, and Preston's just holding the gun on him. And I swear, Preston is just waiting for him to set him up to say, I pay it gladly. He's just like, say something, set me up, say something, something where I can say, I pay it gladly.
I want something to reference Sean Bean at the beginning of the movie. Say something that'll let me do that.
Yeah. So then the next scene, and I want to point out, because in this next scene, when Preston comes out of the elevator with a couple of dead sweepers, he's got this cut on his neck, and he's been bleeding down his whites. And for a lot of people thought this was actually, there was a cut in between scene. And it actually was it was a very conscious decision by the director. There wasn't a scene cut. He just decided if Preston's been fighting through sweepers this entire way to get from DuPont's office to, like, the father hub, he said, I don't care how good you are, eventually somebody's going to be able to at least get a flesh wound.
Yeah.
So,
but when I first saw it, I thought that one of the shots from DuPont had actually grazed him on the neck there. And when I was watching it again, I was actually looking for it, and no, that didn't happen. But you know what? I'm just gonna say that it happened, and that's where it was coming from.
Yeah. All right. So now's the time on Hero Talk where we discuss what our favorite part of the film was. And so, Nick, what was your favorite part of this movie?
My favorite part of this movie would have to be the opening sequence, where you see that, like you mentioned, that one shot where they zoom around, where Preston kicks down the door, slides all the way into the room, and then there's a couple moments where you hear the sense offenders just kind of whispering to each other. It's like, is he there? Did somebody get him? Shut up, shut up. And then you see little shots of him shooting off in different directions. And when everyone's down, the barrels of his guns are glowing in the dark.
Yeah.
You know,
oh,
that was a neat shot, and you don't really see that anywhere else. But he certainly did fire quite a lot. So
I love this scene. Even the parts that were absolutely silly and ridiculous to it, I still love.
Like the fact that he was standing bolt upright the entire time and didn't move.
Yeah. If I had to say my favorite scene, and the opening scene, it was definitely in consideration, and it was very close to being that. But I have to say, I really love that ending sequence, like right after the polygraph goes flat, and then he just kind of goes on his wanton level of destruction, where he just decides, all right, I think I'm gonna just kill everybody now.
Yeah.
I just love that part. It was fun. You get to see Chris Bale doing the gun kata and flipping around. You get to see, like, all these guys getting shot left ways and right ways, and then you get
there's a couple of little innovative little touches in there with the weighted magazines he throws in.
Oh yeah, the ones that just kind of like they're almost like those bopping clowns that always are upright. Yeah,
weebles.
Yeah, it's plus. I mean, this is an action scene. It's all one scene. But there's 3 distinct, different types of action sequences that you get. First you get the run and gun, then you get the close quarter sword play, then you get the close quarters gun kata. It's got a little bit of everything.
I do have to give an honorable mention scene as well, though.
Okay. Oh, fair enough. Yeah. What's that?
The bit where he's trying to help the sense offenders escape, and a bunch of sweepers surround him, and he takes out his pistols and gets the spikes out the butts and starts essentially pistol whipping all of them to death. And the first time I saw it, I thought he was just essentially hammering them in the visor, and they dropped, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense. But when I saw it again, I realized that when he was using his pistols to hammer them in the head and hit them in the knees and whatever, they were trying to shoot him the whole time, and he just kept deflecting the muzzles away. And so he was forcing them to actually shoot each other.
That was really good. Now, Nick, for Equilibrium, what would you score this movie?
All 120 kills that Preston had.
Wow. All right. If I had to score this movie, I would give it 4 creepy little kids pointing out sense offenders out of 5. Yeah, you know what? I think I was originally thinking I was going to give it a 3. I was going to drop at 1 point because the gun swap didn't work. And I was going to drop at another point because they made a point of killing some dogs in the movie, and I usually drop things a point. But the bottom line is the dog thing did happen off screen, and he saved a puppy, and he killed a lot of guys to continue to save the puppy. And so I think that gives you an extra point back.
Fair enough.
When you start killing American gladiators to save a puppy, I think you deserve an extra point. So that's what I got it. So anyway, hey Nick, thanks for joining me and thanks for doing this with me.
I had a fun time.
All right, and by the way, Nick, Happy New Year.
You too, man.
All right, so on behalf of myself and Nick, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. If you have a movie you want us to discuss, or if you want to join the panel, you can email herotalk@enthusiacs.com. For more podcasts, Let's Plays, articles, videos, and reviews, visit enthusiacs.com. You can follow us on Twitter, that's @enthusiacs. We are on YouTube, channel name is Enthusiacs, and as always, we will see you right back here on the next Hero Talk.